Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth Podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello, welcome back to the Wade Borth Podcast. Today, I have a super good friend of mine, Tarisa Shelton. She is a rising star in our industry and our business. And I'm so honored, and it's my pleasure to introduce her. And we're going to have a great conversation today. Tarisa has been in the business of teaching people how to take control of the banking function of their lives for about 2.5, 3 years. Is that correct, Tarisa?
Yeah, 2.5, 3 years full time. I would say 5 years if you include part time.
That's a lot of how people start, and then we get a good understanding. So we're going to get into that. So just a little bit about Tarisa is that she resides in the Phoenix area down in Arizona, so she's always enjoying the warmth and the beauty of Arizona. But I've had the privilege of knowing her for about the last 1.5 years, and it's my pleasure because she brings a ton of energy to every conversation. She brings a ton of love to her clients and to her client conversations. And so, again, today, what we want to do is we want to make this maybe a multi-part series, Tarisa, where we're going to talk about kind of your journey, where you're at, kind of your story, and then maybe get into a little bit more about what are some of the basic principles that you like to live by. And so we'll take it from there, and then we'll, again, for the listener, again, this is going to be a multi-part series, so look forward to the future podcast. But today, maybe, Tarisa, if you want to take a quick moment and tell us kind of a little bit about your journey, because I think it's really important for the listeners, the people that tune into the podcast, to understand who you are and what we're going to talk about, why it's important to you. So if you don't mind just taking a moment to kind of go through that.
Yes, absolutely. I'd be honored to. And I'm also honored to be here with you today, Wade. So thank you so much for having me. I always love our conversation. So you're already making my day, starting the morning off with having a great conversation. So let's see. What's interesting about me? What's my story? So I was born and raised in Arizona, like you already mentioned. And I have a lovely mom and dad. I grew up in Arizona. I have 2 younger siblings that mean the world to me. And I was taught a lot of things about money that I think most people were that I took to heart. So it was go to school, get a good job, have a 401k, and then it's all going to work out. And growing up, I kind of realized through some incidents that wasn't necessarily true. So the first thing that happened was my dad got really sick, and my dad is my world. Like, he's just the best guy ever. And so that was really hard for my family because he was like the main breadwinner in our family. So watching him go from not that he wasn't strong, he was strong in a different way. This big guy kind of being knocked down was really hard for my family. And so one of those things that happened was he tried to access his qualified plan dollars, and they were like, hey, you're going to be penalized if you access this money. And when you're going through a hard time, it's so interesting to me how we don't think about the restrictions of where we're placing our money. So that was one thing that happened growing up, where I was just kind of questioning, are we actually taught the things about money that benefit the people that need it the most?
How old was your dad when that all happened?
Let's see.
Roughly.
I think, so he first got really sick when I was in 5th grade. He was young. I mean, luckily he's still with us today, so I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, it was 5th grade. So it was a really hard time for my family. And it just, like I said, it had me kind of questioning some things about finances, because it wasn't that my dad didn't make a great income, right? That wasn't the issue. It was more so, are we allocating those dollars to the places that best serve our family? And we had to learn the hard way that wasn't necessarily the case. And then growing up, my parents got divorced, I think, when I was 16. And my mom had to file bankruptcy shortly after. So there was a lot of financial mishaps in my family that were really hard to go through. And it had me be so committed at a very young age that I was like, I don't know what I need to figure out in order to not repeat the cycle, but I know that I will. And so that's really what started me on this journey. And before I kind of found that answer, which I know we're going to get into, I worked 2 full-time jobs to pay cash for my college education because I was like, I don't want to be in debt. And I was like the pay cash girl, the envelope system girl. I worked at the Good Egg with my brother and sisters, like a cute breakfast restaurant in Gilbert, for about 5-6 years. So I always joke with people and tell them that I'm a trained extrovert. So I'm great with people, but it's because I had to be serving and I really get my energy in my downtime. But it was so great having that experience with my siblings and being able to work and have a great time. In fact, we actually just had a graduation party for my little brother who graduated from ASU, and both of our previous bosses from the Good Egg attended his
Oh, nice.
graduation party. Yeah, it was such a good time. So we were kind of a close-knit family, even working in that industry. So yeah, I graduated college, and I kind of figured I don't really want to grow up all the way just yet. So I went to go teach English in Korea for a year, and that was so fun. And during that time, I was like, okay, I want to have as much fun as humanly possible before I have to get a big girl job. And I want to learn as much about finances as humanly possible. So I started just reading everything I could get my hands on in terms of financial literacy, or as you like to say, financial awareness. So I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Killing Sacred Cows. I can't remember which book Tony Robbins wrote, but it's like a huge, thick book. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the name is escaping my head at the moment, but I know what you're talking about. But
Yeah, so I just was doing as much digging as humanly possible, and I really was trying to figure out how are the 1% of people earning their money but keeping their money at work so that they don't have to be worried about money and they can make sound financial decisions and build an unbreakable foundation, because that's really what I was after. How can you build something so that it doesn't break? So that no matter how life goes, linear or not, how can you make sure that you're okay at the end of the day? So that's really how I was driven in terms of finding a solution. And it wasn't until 2016, I would say, that I came across this concept from Garrett Gunderson, actually, in that book, Killing Sacred Cows. He said, I saved up inside of a high cash value whole life insurance policy. I borrowed against it. I paid cash for a car, and then I paid myself back with interest, and I acted as the banker in that situation. And it just made so much sense to me because banks make so much money and all they do is sell it. And we give it to them in ample supply. It's like we give banks an inventory that they sell every single day. And so they have unlimited supply and unlimited demand. So they have so many captive customers. And I'm like, that's actually a brilliant business model, because that's all they're doing. We get 0.01% on our savings account, and they turn around and sell it back to us in the form of a car loan, a mortgage loan, or what credit card debt, whatever it is. And we give them the product that they sell. So how I like to talk about this is like, let's say I'm in the Apple business and I have people lined up out the door to hand me their apples that I'm then going to sell. How great of a business is that?
fabulous.
Exactly. And so I just was like, I was like, no one is thinking like the banker. This is the problem. Everyone is thinking like the consumer. Everyone is thinking like the investor or the business owner, but the bank is making money off of all of that activity every single day. And if we just look up to see what's actually happening and how banks look at our families as the ultimate source of cash flow, and we can take even a portion of that business that's already existing, we will be so much better off financially. To me, the light bulbs clicked immediately. So then it became a question of like, okay, how can I implement this, right? I found what I want to do. I found it. I understand it. Now I want to actually implement it. And like I said, I was traveling. I went to Vietnam with my brother and sister after my sister graduated high school. I went to the Philippines with some of my friends. I was able to see so many different parts of the world and learn from so many different people. And in doing so, I spent a lot of good money having a great time. So when I first learned about this, honestly, I didn't have much money to my name, because I really did. I spent it a lot on enjoying myself and having fun in different countries. And so when I got back to the States in 2017, that's when I was handed the Becoming Your Own Banker book. And so I read that book and I was like, okay, this is just solidifying what I already believed to be the solution. And I got started immediately after that with my first policy. And now I've built up a system of policies since that time. But yeah, I got started. I was so certain that this was the solution. And now I have the pleasure of teaching this to people every day, teaching this to clients, helping them get started for their families. And I honestly, I feel so honored and so fulfilled to be able to help people out with this process, because if it weren't for someone sitting down with me and handing me Nelson's book, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation today. And that's really what it's all about, is sharing this knowledge with the world so that they too can then do better for their families with the same amount of cash flow, which to me is so incredible. Like I said, I was doing it part-time. So when I got back from Korea, I was a production manager at an animation studio for a few years, which was super fun. I got to look at cool artwork every day, but it wasn't nearly as fulfilling as this. And that's ultimately what led me to start this business, be in this business, and help clients with just changing their thinking about money and what's possible.
That's fabulous. Hey, so real quick, and I don't know that I did this. I know I didn't do this at the beginning, so I apologize. Tarisa is out there. She's meeting a ton of people. And we'll both agree that what we're looking for is Tarisa's out there shining her light and said, this is my message. And so if you're hearing Tarisa and what she's saying is resonating with you, I would encourage the listeners to reach out to her. She'd love to tell your story. She is very much a go-giver. She has such a giving, a fruitful heart that anybody that would want to talk to her and share their story with her, she would love to listen to it and help you along your way any way she possibly can. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you, how would they reach you?
Great question. So email is great. So Tarisa, Tarisa at Factum, Factum financial.com. So yes, I mean, email. I love talking to people. I love getting to know people and just connecting. That's really what I love to do.
Yeah, and that's what I love about your spirit is like you are such a go-giver, and your spirit is always about, hey, I want to bring you such value that you can go and give as much value to maybe 10 other people. That's the spirit that you always drive with, and that's what I've come to see out of you. So thank you for sharing. So again, it's Tarisa, which isn't Teresa. I've had to be corrected. It's Tarisa at factumfinancial.com, right?
Yes, thanks, Wade. I appreciate your kind words. And yeah, I think I've actually been reading this book now that we're talking about this, called Ego is the Enemy. And I just love it because the argument essentially is there's a difference between passion and purpose. Passion is self-serving. Like, I like to do this because, whereas purpose is, I like to do this for. I like to do this to contribute to a larger vision. And so I tell people, I'm not passionate about infinite banking. I'm purposeful about infinite banking because I see that the generational problem we all face and we might not know about is access to cash. And so when you implement this solution, you have a generational solution. And I love big picture concepts. And so when I first read Becoming Your Own Banker, and Nelson Ash goes over the intergenerational transfer of money, the use of capital inside of a policy, and then the transfer of that capital once we're to pass, it just made all the sense in the world to me. And I think about infinite banking as you never have to start over again. Imagine the power of that for families. You never have to start over again. If my parents had started a policy for me, I would be in a very different situation financially than I am today. But now I have the luxury and the ability to change that for my children. And I just think that's so exciting, is that all we do all day, me and you, with these conversations is we're planting seeds. And sometimes that seed grows right away, and sometimes it grows in a few years, and that's okay. The point is that we're planting these seeds, we're talking about these ideas so that people can have hope for the future. And that's really what I was searching for along this journey, is hope. I'm like, success leaves clues. So what is the solution to make sure that this never happens again to my family? Because I think that there's so much inherent shame around lack of financial literacy, shame behind things happening like bankruptcy. And I don't think it's because of lack of money. I honestly think it's because of lack of education. And that's why I'm so adamant that people read Nelson's book, that they attend workshops, that they really take the time to get educated, because it's so powerful. Once you have that information and you understand it, you can never unknow it.
I agree with you 100%. One of my favorite books is The Richest Man of Babylon, which in there, and obviously I'm paraphrasing like I do most books. I don't read it to memorize every line. But what I get from that book is it's not the money that's powerful. It's the knowledge and understanding of how to make that money and also how to keep that money. Yes. And that's really the message that I like to share, that I want people to understand, because again, you and I are kind of cut from the same cloth. I don't want to become somebody else's banker. I want to empower you to become your own banker. And I think that's the real key is I don't want to be a gatekeeper. My job is to teach and to empower people to become, and again, Nelson wrote the work Becoming Your Own Bankers, for them to become their own banker, not me or somebody else taking control of that. And I think that's I'm thinking your dad's story, it keeps popping back in and it comes back around, is you said something too, that life isn't linear. Isn't that the truth? I mean, think about that powerful statement, is that everybody has this all planned out until something goes wrong. And then what? Then what is the plan? And I think it was Mike Tyson or somebody said, some boxer said, everybody's got a plan until I punch him in the mouth. Right? Think about that from life, right?
Yes, absolutely. And life has some hard knocks. And that's not to say that we can't be better people going through those experiences, but wouldn't you want a financial strategy that works for you no matter what? And I think that's the key, because there's the way that financial planning is happening now that most people have bought into. It's not a this works no matter what plan. It's a this works if the market is up plan. It's a this works if taxes aren't super high when you retire plan. Like, there's so many different caveats that we're not taught to think about that really impact someone's quality of life, in my opinion, in a poor manner. And it's too bad, because I always say, like, the reason why I love teaching this is because I wish someone like me had sat down with my family 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and had these conversations and asked these important questions. You know, I have a great client. He's in Arizona. He makes great income. He's a physician. And we sat down and I was asking him just simple questions. He's like, here's everything that I'm doing with my money. And I was like, what do you like about that? He's putting all this money in his qualified plans. And he's like, you know, no one's ever asked me that question. He was like, I'm not sure I do like it. And I'm like, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? And is what you're doing now serving your ability to go out and do those things? Because if it's not, then maybe it's time to do something a little bit different. And I recently had a conversation with him, and he told me that he just fired his financial advisor. So it's interesting to me, like, his journey of saying, oh, no one's asked me that question before. I didn't tell him what to do. I just asked him, what do you like about this? Is this helping you reach your goals? And if not, are you open to receiving some new information?
Wow, that's powerful. That's huge. Because it's not, again, it goes back to the empowerment, not so much I'm going to tell you, I think I heard somebody say, is somebody else being the director in your family film, right? Or in your life, right? So you become the director. And that's really powerful, that statement you just made. So, and kind of going back to that same conversation, I'm a firm believer in this, is that we've been conditioned to think like a consumer instead of a business person, instead of a banker. And again, I'm not talking Wells Fargo, I'm just talking the concept and the thoughts about how we treat our money, right? I think about, there's a couple of commercials out there for a while that were like, what's your number? So they're all, you got to put so much away, you got to put so much away. And again, you put it away out of your control, give it to somebody else. The reason why they ran that commercial so they can collect your dollars, and then they're going to grow. And then they're telling you, well, now we're going to control how fast you consume it, but you still have to consume it. I mean, that's a qualified plan versus having it work for you for the rest of your life. And like you said, you don't have to start over going to the next generation.
Right.
That's the power. That's the part that excites me. Maybe as I get older, that's what becomes a lot more exciting, is what can I do to empower that next generation or the generation after that? That, again, I was like you. The last thing we talked about at our dinner table was money. Right? We never talked about money. Probably because we didn't have any. Maybe it's easy not to talk about something you didn't have.
Right.
But it was hard to have that conversation. And when you don't have that conversation, what habits do you learn? You learn the habits you see, that you watch your parents go through. Even with disastrous results, you still repeat that same message. So huge applause to you, because you were like willing to step out and say, I don't want to be in that position. And now you're sharing that message so other people don't have to be in that position as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's incredible what can happen when you're solution oriented. And I think that is one of the things that I love about myself, actually, is that I always look for a way to do something instead of saying, oh, it's not possible. It's like, okay, how can it be possible? And how can I start that and start teaching it to other people? And I think that when everyone has that frame of thinking, the only thing that we can all do together is be better. Do better for our families, do better for our friends, the people that we care about. So it really is just such a positive ripple effect that is so exciting to see play out. So I just love infinite banking. I love being in this industry, and I love challenging the way people think about money, because if you don't start asking yourself those questions now, you're going to be asking yourself those questions later at a time where you maybe are not able to afford asking those questions. So I always say, like, get curious about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and if it makes sense for you, because if it doesn't, it's never too late to pivot.
And I think just knowing you well enough, exactly what you said, be curious about, question boldly every step you take, because when you're 25 or 30 years old, you have time on your side. When you're 55 or 60 years old, you still have some time on your side, but you just have a lot less, right? And so when you're asking questions, whatever age it is, still ask boldly, and don't accept my word for it. Go out and do your own research. Go out and look and read and listen to what we have to say, and then challenge everybody as much as you would challenge me, right? That's what I encourage people to do. If somebody wants to challenge what I'm saying, I'm open to that, as long as you're challenging everybody else's advice as well at that same level, because then that means you're curious about, or you're serious about your money.
Absolutely. Actually, I want to bring up this thought because it just made me think about something you always say, which is no matter what you're going through financially, cash is always a solution.
Yeah.
And I not enough people think about that. I recently had a client who started IBC, and they had a friend, and the friend went to them and they said, hey, I have all of this money sitting in my Roth IRA, but I don't want to touch it because my financial advisor said that I shouldn't. Granted, this guy that he's talking to is strapped for cash, right? Yeah. So the person that started IBC said, okay, well, I can give you this short-term loan. Here are the interest payments that you're going to pay me. And the loan amount was so small in comparison to how much money this guy had in his Roth IRA. And because this guy had access to cash and was able to solve that problem for his friend, he made a 75% return off of those dollars in just 3 months. And I think that to me signifies the power of being in the banking position. Everyone always needs access to cash, no matter what. And that's one of the things that Nelson says. When you have access to cash and it's in your control, a deal of a lifetime comes across your desk every single day.
Right. And to that point, when you say 75%, that's an annual rate of return, because he just took his money out, or I shouldn't say he took his money, he had access to money, where the guy that had the Roth didn't, even though he maybe had a couple $100,000 there, he couldn't get access to a couple $1,000, right? And that's the crazy part.
Well, and he was incentivized not to. It's like his financial advisor said, hey, don't touch this money because you're going to be penalized for it. Well, he's technically already being penalized because he's strapped for cash right now.
Right.
And so
was he penalized at that rate, right? Do you think about it?
Yes. And that's the question. I love these 3 questions. Are you putting your money in an environment where you have access to it? Are you putting your money in an environment where you have control over it? So it doesn't matter what the stock market is doing. You know every single day your account is going up. You honestly cannot put a price on peace of mind.
100% true. What was the 3rd question?
3rd question. Okay. Sorry, my brain was going in a million different places. So do you have control? Do you have access? And is it guaranteed? Is it guaranteed to only go up? And if the answer is no, then in my mind, you're not actually saving money. You're speculating with it. And can you afford to lose that money that you're quote unquote saving? And if you can't, then my recommendation to you is to read Becoming Your Own Banker, to start getting educated on the only guaranteed asset in the world, which is high cash value, whole life dividend paying insurance with a mutually owned company. So those 3 questions, I think if people really think critically about them, they're simple questions, but they're powerful questions. It would probably cause a lot of people to wonder if they're doing the right things for themselves financially, not what everyone is telling them to do. It's very easy to go into your neighborhood and everyone's talking about here's what I'm doing with my money, here's what I'm investing. But it's like, is that enhancing your quality of life?
Yeah,
Is that giving you more control, more freedom?
and that's what you want your money to provide at the end of the day. If you think about it, why do we trade our most valuable asset, which is our time, for something that's infinitely available, which is money, right? You think
Yes.
about that for a second. We have the most valuable thing in our lives, which is our time. We trade it for money, and then what does that money do for us? Does it give us that time back, or does it give us that freedom of money, or that freedom of time, the freedom of relationship, the freedom of purpose? If it's not solving those freedoms, then we have to ask, why are we giving up that valuable asset, to your point?
Absolutely.
So,
Yes. There's an infinite number of ways to make money, and there's only a finite amount of time we have here on this planet. So it actually makes more sense to figure out how can you have your money always earning and produce you more time. In my opinion, like one of the things I love to do the most is hang out with my family. Like my brother just graduated from college with his bachelor's degree. My whole family was in town, and my cup is so full because I spent so much time with them. And I really think that if people are very honest with themselves, they want to have time freedom. And the best way to have time freedom is to have money freedom. Like money can buy you more time.
yeah, it won't buy more time on this earth before you graduate, but it will buy you quality of time that you can use, right?
There we
It's
go.
not,
That's a better way to say it.
yeah, and if you're working for somebody else, then it's their time. You're trading your time. You're exchanging your time for those dollars. Well, now if we have our dollars working for us and producing income and producing some freedom of relationship and time and purpose, then that gives us time to go, like you said, you're going to fill up your circle with your family because you want to spend time with your brother because of his graduation. It's a celebration. And you might take 2 or 3 days to do it, or go on a cruise, or whatever it might be that you would find to be fun. So that's the real benefit. So just think about that. And we're going to get into a little bit more of, and I'm excited to talk about with Tarisa about this, is like, who should be doing this? Who should be looking at this? And what does that person look like that wants to be doing this? And then on top of that, we're going to be talking about what that process looks like. So I'm just going to encourage you to catch our second installment in this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this portion. And then part 2 will be coming out next week. So again, be on the lookout for it, because it's going to be a great conversation. The ideas that Tris is going to share with us about who can benefit from this, and then what the process looks like, is going to can change your life. Again, if we've had conversations, it probably isn't going to be new to you, but it's going to be from a very different angle. Tarisa, like everybody else, is on their separate journey in this process. And again, we work together. We want to support and lift everyone up, but everybody's at a different spot in their life. And so it's going to be so much fun to hear kind of what your take is on this. So again, everyone, if you haven't had a chance, factumfinancial.com is where you can find Tarisa. You can email her at Tarisa, T-A-S-A, at factumfinancial.com. So thanks again for the first segment of this, and looking forward to our next section.
Thanks so much, Wade. It's always a pleasure, and I can't wait for our next conversation.
If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button, and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches, and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.